Welcome to Awakened Titans podcast with Lily Patrascu, mind-blowing conversations with influential business titans sharing how you can manifest abundance, love, joy, success through quantum awakening, quantum manifestation, quantum healing, quantum miracles, exponential business growth, and innovative products and services. Discover how to reset your life in today's episode with Mark Doherty. He is a former financial controller, cancer survivor, stocks investor, and personal finance consultant, and author of two amazing books. One is called Reset, and another one is called I'm a Genius. Ask Me. He's also an overall awesome dude. So we're going to have a lot of fun in this episode. The very first question is, what's the secret to your success?
Boy, I would say probably the biggest thing is resilience and that willingness to never give up. Life can be very tough, and we'll probably get into it. I had cancer. I had a lot of fear and anxiety in my life. I was able to pound through it. And then in 2020, I'm a financial guy. I have an accounting degree. I always liked playing in the stock market. And so after I retired, I started managing my own finances and did really well in the stock market in 2020, which is why I wrote my second book, I'm a Genius. Now, to fess up, Lily, I lost about half of what I gained, but I made enough money to buy my way out of debt. I have a home in La Paz, Mexico. As a matter of fact, I'll be leaving here. Currently, I'm in Oregon, and we have a cabin in Oregon. So I'll be heading back to Mexico in about a month, and I'm usually there for 9 or 10 months out of the year. I just love it. So very lucky person, but being resilient, hanging in there, and pounding through some difficult times in my life.
Thank you. How did you become an awakened titan, and how did that lead to your personal life reset?
Boy, that's a great question. As a kid, my first book I wrote was Reset, How Beating Cancer Ended Decades of Paralyzing Fear and Anxiety. I'm Irish Catholic from Chicago, Illinois. We had 7 kids in our family. My dad was a disciplinarian, and I grew up fearing my dad. And eventually I had my first panic attack when I was 19 years old. And eventually at 40, that turned into cancer at 48. And then at 54, I only had 1.5 feet of my colon left. And the doctor he wanted to do a final colonoscopy, and my colon burst during the exam. So at 54, I was a mess. I went down, I weighed 220 pounds now. I was down to 150 pounds. I didn't have solid food for 6 months. I had a PICC line in my arm. But in the process of that, and why I titled my book Reset, and I believe this, I think when you fast, which ultimately was what I did because I didn't have solid food, my small intestines shut down, so the doctors wouldn't let me eat. And so my body went down to square one. And as I got better, I realized I didn't have my fear and anxiety anymore. And that was, I don't want to say cancer saved my life, but I was able to get my life back. And so at about 60 years old, I finally got over the hump. I reconciled with my father and basically got my life back.
Wow. So what should entrepreneurs do in order to reset their life?
Wow, you're asking some tough, great questions here. Because of my financial background, and I do read a lot of books, and I always kind of had this feeling, Lily, if somebody could make big money in the stock market, so could I. I'm not a genius. I don't have this huge IQ, although, as you said in the opening, I am awesome. But I'm sure I don't have this huge IQ. And so I had to, especially as I retired, I tried to figure out how I could make more money. And when I retired, I started my 401k very late. I was actually the U.S. payroll manager for Nike, which is headquartered here in Beaverton, Oregon. I was there for 4 years, and I started that job at 40 years old. And up until that time, I was the controller of small companies, usually in the $1 to $5 million range in revenue. And then I went to Nike at 40, and that was when I started my 401k. And so I was really behind the eight ball. I'm 60. I'll be 68 years old next month. And when I started my work history, 401ks were not that prominent. Virtually no small companies had them. You could go to the big boys, and they were getting into them. But nobody at the time, this was back in the 80s, nobody really, at least I didn't have much exposure to 401k. So anyways, when I got to Nike, I started saving. And when I retired, I had $550,000 in my IRA. And I had moved my money to a financial planner. And I think we paid her with the side, and then my wife had a 401k as well. So between the two of us, she had about $700,000 of our money. And I remember the first year I was with her, and she was a nice person. She wasn't mean or anything. She wasn't an idiot. But we had paid her like $10,000 that year, and we didn't even beat the S&P 500. And, I'm a math guy and a spreadsheet guy, and I thought, I'm paying her 10 grand a year. We're there for 20 years. I'm paying her $200,000. And who's to say we're going to beat the market? So anyways, long story short, I decided I was going to trade my own account. And so I read some books. And then in 2020, as COVID hit, I read this book on Leap's options, which are stock options, but they're just long term. They're 18 months to 2 years or so. And I read this book and I was blown away. And so I started, and I wanted to make money too. For me, Mark Doherty, I wanted to make money, but I didn't have a product to sell. And I was retired at the time. I didn't want to go back to work. And so I thought to myself, what's the easiest way to do that? Well, it's the stock market, because you're your own boss. And so you can do your homework, choose some stocks. Sometimes you make money, sometimes you don't. So that's what I found that I liked about the stock market. So I started trading my own account, and I started doing options in March of 2020, which was when COVID hit and the lockdown happened. So I started trading the first week of March, and the second week of March, they shut the country down. And of course, I don't know if your podcast people remember, the market dumped. In my account went from 550,000 to 425,000 in a matter of 2 weeks. So I lost $125,000. Now, most people would have freaked out, and I was freaking out a little bit. And I say this, Lily, if there were 10 of us that started investing on that first part of March and would have lost 125,000, 8 people would have just got out, said this doesn't work, the strategy doesn't work, it's terrible. There might have been one guy or gal that was thinking about getting out, and then there would be one guy that decided to stay in. I was the one guy who decided to stay in. And so my goal when I started was just to get my account from 500,000 to $1 million, no matter how long that took. I hit my $1 million, and I thought this was going to take a couple of years at least, My account hit $1 million in August of 2020, which blew me away. And by the end of the year, my account was at 1.7 million. So I had killed it. And then shortly into 2021, I hit $2 million. And then the market started to come down. And as it came down, I was buying more and more, kind of dollar averaging down on my options. And I wound up losing about half of my gain, which is why I wrote the second book, I'm a Genius, Just Ask Me. It's kind of a pun that, I made a ton of money, but I'm going to pony up and tell you I lost a lot of money too. But the good news about it is that I bought my way out of debt. We have, as I told you before we started, my wife and I have a casa in La Paz, Mexico, which is just 2 hours north of Cabo, San Lucas. We own that outright. And then I'm sitting at our cabin here in Oregon. We own it outright. So we still have a good chunk of change in our 401k. We're not rich, And then we were very lucky. My wife was a teacher in Portland, so we have her pension and we have our two Social Securities. So in the big scheme of life, Mark and Sally Doherty are doing okay. We hung in there. We did just fine.
Thank you. You look a little bit too fun to be working with finance stuff. So my question is, how did that reset? I can't even imagine that you would even need a reset because you look like such a fun, bubbly guy. How did that even happen? And how can leverage your techniques in order to reset their own life? Do you have any particular steps?
Well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I mean to interrupt you. I think it's important in life that you find a niche, something that you enjoy. I saw this thing on Instagram, and the guy said, in order to be happy in retirement, he said you need 5 hobbies. And I almost have all of these 5. He says you have to have a hobby that makes money. And for me, that's investing in the market. You got to have a hobby that keeps you healthy. I walk. I did an hour walk this morning before our podcast, and I work out 2 or 3 times a week. You got to have a mental health hobby, something, mindfulness, meditation, something that reduces your stress. Also, one of the things I do is I read a lot. And it's funny, Lily, because as a young kid, I hated to read. And all my success, I would say, and failures, but all my success as a retired adult came from reading books, and that was the purpose of my second book. I've read so many books from different authors who have the right formula to get rich. And to a large degree, I don't buy into that. Everybody's different. Like as an example, everybody thinks they're an entrepreneur. And I think it's a lot tougher to be an entrepreneur than people think. I worked for small business until I went to Nike. And I'll tell you, running a business is a tough deal. You have to be willing to be patient, believe in yourself, have good underneath you. I always felt I wasn't the idea guy. My strength was the administrative end. I did all the financial statements. I dealt with the insurance companies. I did all that. Let the owner, who was the product guy, let him run with that. My job was basically to accumulate and give him information to help him make better decisions and get us going. So, sometimes, I see things where they say, not that you're a loser being an employee, but I mean, that's how most of us make our money in life. Not every an entrepreneur. And so I think there's nothing wrong with being a solid employee. I think the good news now is that people, if you got good skills, you're going to make a good wage working. You're going to be able to save. You're going to be able to get stock options depending on the size of the company. And so what you have to do to answer your question, you have to reset your mind and realize that you're going to retire someday. You have to put your instant gratification on hold, and you got to look at the big picture and start thinking about, what do I want my life to be like when I'm no longer working? And I think that's huge. As a financial guy, I always talked about retirement, and especially being so sick, Lily, there was a time where I didn't think I was even going to be able to retire. I mean, I was physically in bad shape. I was probably closer to dying than I ever thought I was. I never felt like I was going to die, but there were times I wish I had. I mean, I was really messed up. And if your podcasters read my book, Reset, there's a lot of trauma involved in that. Now, as you pointed out, the good news is it was a happy ending. I feel fantastic. It's funny as you're working, how your stress level changes. There's so much stress in, getting married, raising a family, keeping the money flowing in as an employee or as an entrepreneur. So you got to find your niche, kind of stick with it, and be patient.
Thank you. You look about 30 years younger. So what did you do in order to overcome cancer and revitalize yourself to such a way that you're looking so much more than your age and so revitalized and so energetic, so charismatic, so fun? Like there's a proper zest of life that is noticeable when people see you. So how did you manage to do that?
I think in one word, humor. I believe have a good sense of humor. And I developed it through my fear and anxiety, because one of the things you do when you're anxious, at least I had to, because I was, and people find it hard to believe because I'm a talker, was that, oh God, I lost my train of thought here for a second.
So you became, and because of your sense of humor, and you put in a lot of positivity into everything you're doing.
Yes, my sense of humor. So I used humor and sarcasm to manage my environment. I was so afraid, and I had panic attacks when I walked into a room, or like I had to give a speech at Nike. I had a high position at all the companies I had. Never had to speak, stand up and speak. So I would use humor to kind of take control of the situation. And it's going to sound mean, and I don't mean it to be, but I would poke at people. I'm a very sarcastic kind of guy. And I would come in and I would poke at people. And once I got the focus kind of temporarily off of myself, I could relax. And I think my sense of humor, I was very grateful. This is going to sound weird. I was very grateful that I had anxiety rather than depression. And believe me, there were times when I was depressed about my health situation, but I was never chronically depressed. My thing was anxiety, so you tend to be up and anxious versus depression and down. So I used my sense of humor and tried to make light of my issues, be a bit self-deprecating, and not try to take my situation overly serious. There was no real, we all, when you have a chronic, it's hard not to sink, and it's like, oh my God, am I going to even live? I remember when I had my colonoscopy and the doctor took a picture of my tumor, and I thought, I came home, I went on the internet, and I thought, because they don't tell you what stage you have at that point in time. And, I read stage 4. I probably did the worst thing you could do, Lily. I went on Google and Googled cancer stages, saw stage 4, and thought, oh my God, I'm dead, And so I wound up having stage 3 and came out well. But I used humor to manage doctors, manage myself, manage my situation. That was my biggest plus.
Thank you. Did you use any exercise, any particular vitamins, or any dietary changes that made a significant difference to your reset and to your positivity in a way that you felt perhaps that kind of changed the balance and made the biggest difference to your coming back to life?
Yeah, the answer to the question is no. I was so sick. My system down. And there's a liquid nourishment. It's called TPN, and they were in these big bags. And like once a week, this guy would come from the pharmacy and put them in our refrigerator. And then I had a PICC line in my arm here, my bicep, and my son would hook up the bag. And then it took about 12 hours for it to get in my system. And then my wife, when she went to school, she would unhook it. And that was basically all I had. If I water or anything, it would get stuck in my system. So there weren't any supplements or anything like that. And I remember when I got better, I started coming out of all this when I was 56. My colon burst at 54. And I remember it took me about a year to be able to go out and walk even a mile and sweat. My system was so messed up, I wouldn't even sweat. And I remember the first time I tried to cut the grass at home, I walked down the one side, I came back, and I was exhausted. I had to hire a gentleman to come and cut my grass. I had no strength. But as I got better, one of the things that's always stayed with me my whole life, and I used it to manage stress, was exercise. And that it kills two birds with one stone. It helps you physically, but it also helps you mentally as well. And health is a big part of my life now. When I got sick, my goal was to get to retirement as soon as I could, and I retired at 61, and to live until I was at least 65. I thought if I could leave till 65 and have even just 2 or 3 years of a decent retirement, I would be happy. And now I'm 68. I feel great. I do something physical every day. I do take some vitamins. I take vitamin D. I take a magnesium. I take a multivitamin kind of thing, but I don't really overload it on much. And I try, especially in Mexico, since I've been home and it's been kind of rainy here in Oregon, I probably have gained 10 pounds. And so, when you're in Mexico, the sun's out every day. And I mean, you get up, the beach is a block away from our house. The Casa swimming pool in our complex is right next to our house. We have a golf course there. I mean, we're going all the time. And that's huge for me as a retiree. I see so many people, and I've known so many people who retire and they sit home and watch the TV and don't do anything. And it's like, so you work your whole life and this is what you want to do. And so I tend to, and kind of coinciding with that, Lily, I tend to be tough on people because I was so sick. I know what it's like to be, let's say, close to death or ill. And sadly, most people don't get off their ass until they're really sick or their doctor says, you got, diabetes. You're going to have to take a shot now the rest of your life. Now they get their act together. It's like, why don't you be smart, especially as a retiree, and get off your ass and get going? I mean, what's better in life than having, which I do, enough money to have a decent retirement and to be healthy, to be able to do the things you want to do. To me, that's a touchdown. That should be everybody's goal in my mind.
Thank you. Entrepreneurs tend to need a financial reset, mental reset, a wellness reset in order to perform at their best. And I find that when you don't have the health to actually do it, the entire system can collapse immediately. So I'm wondering, how did you manage to maintain your wealth and to even grow it whilst being so sick for such a long time?
That is a great question, Lily. I was born in 1956, and this is maybe going to upset some of your podcasters, but I grew up, we had 7 kids in our family. My mom stayed home and raised us kids, and my dad went out to work every day. And even though I had my first panic attack at 19, and I was in the Air Force at the time, and I was on flight status, so there was a lot of pressure, and I didn't know what was happening to me. I thought I was going nuts. And so there was a lot of pressure to show up for work every day and do what they're paying you to do. And the same thing happened to me as an adult. We had kids, we had a mortgage. I didn't have the luxury of crawling in the corner and sitting and feeling sorry for myself. I mean, even at Nike, and I put this in my book, Nike was a stressful job. It was, when I started there, I was the U.S. payroll manager. We had 6 people in my department, and I had never managed more than 2 people at that time. I knew a gal. I got this job kind of as a fluke. By the end of the day, I left 4 years later, I had 18 people underneath me. And I would drive I would my kids off at school, and as I was driving to Nike, I would be dry heaving, having a panic attack. But once I grabbed the door to my building, Lily, and I pulled that thing off, it was go time. I knew I had to get my shit together. I knew I had to perceive outwardly to be strong. I was always good at what I did. I think I had a good financial head about me. And we did a great job in that payroll department. But and I had to mentally push my way through it. I didn't have that luxury. I didn't have the luxury to fail. If I would have failed, I don't, and the other thing too, I was driven by fear from my father. I feared, ultimately at the end of the day, it was probably about the fear of failing and having my dad come back at me and, I told you you were a loser. I knew you couldn't do it. And that it almost killed me, but it kept.
Wow, that's amazing. So how can entrepreneurs reset their lives if they are currently suffering from anxiety, depression, panic attacks, a health scare of some sort?
The first thing I would tell them is to get into therapy. Therapy was huge for me. And as a male, I felt very emasculated coming to that realization that I needed therapy. When I go in, I would tell them I felt like a wimp because I was a man and I couldn't solve my problem. And again, I was born in the 50s. Men were supposed to be rocks, and you just pounded through it. And I was trying to do that, but at the same time, I was getting killed. And so I went into therapy. Even in college, I did my first therapy. It's in the book. My dad ran away from home. I almost dropping out of college because I felt like, well, if my dad's not going to see me graduate, what's the point? And that was such bullshit. And I'm glad I did that. But so I went into therapy, and I've been in therapy in and out of my life, and it's helped me immensely. And then the other thing I would people that are under the gun is to slow down on your drinking. Like when I was at Nike, I would only drink on Fridays after work and then Saturday, and then dried out Sunday through Thursday because I had to be on. And it was an intense job, and I couldn't come into work hungover. That would have killed me. And I learned through life, Lily, a lot of people drink to escape their problems. Well, the part of it, the set of it is you wake up the next day, you're hungover, and you still have the same problem. So what good did that do you? And then the other thing that was really important to me from a reset standpoint, and I always exercised. I always belonged to a gym. I always ran. I don't run anymore. After I joined a gym and bought my Achilles heel, so I have surgery and get my foot fixed. And so now I just walk. It's really important to me to stay healthy and not be injured. So those are the things that I did to kind of reset my body or to keep the stress down.
Thank you. One thing I'm inferring as well from what you didn't say is that your wife was a big support for you. And I think it's important to choose the right wife or the right life partner or supportive friends, family,
Yes.
Someone who can be a support in tough scenarios. And it really sounds to me like she was there for you in a really, really tough time. And
Right.
she deserves the credit. So you can tell her I said so.
I dedicated my first book to her. So I thought, Lily, I'm covered.
Oh.
But just to kind of expand on that a little bit, and you're absolutely right. Sally was there the whole way. And you know what I think actually happened was it burned her out. I was really sick for, probably in and out for 10 years. And I think it burned her out. It's certainly been tough on our marriage. I tell people you don't go through what I went through. And Sally has her own traumas, but you don't go what I went through and not come out with some kind of issues. I don't think trauma. I was talking to a buddy of mine the other day, and I think he hit the nail on the head. You don't really ever recover from trauma. You learn to manage it. And I thought that was really a profound thing for him to say. The resentments, the stress that you have, those are tough things to let go. So what you have to learn to do really is to manage them. And Sally and I have had some tough times, but we work on it. We've been married. It blows me away to say it. We've been married 40 years. And I think the stress of my illness really pushed us both to the limit. And after I got better, I actually got angry. And I think this happens to a lot of people too, Lily, that under my circumstances. I was angry at my doctors. I was angry at Sally. I was angry at my bosses. I had lost so much of my life through fear and anxiety, and then to get cancer. And at that point in time, I went back into therapy, and it really kind of helped with my reset physically and mentally. Getting into therapy really helped me get to the next level. I can't say enough about therapy and exercise as a way to reset your body and to keep it in tune. And then, of course, entrepreneurs that work, you got to take vacation. This is a very plugged in society now. People have their phones all the time. When I went to work, the biggest thing we had was a fax machine. There was no internet. Nobody had had iPhones. It was a much slower paced time. And now everything is so instantaneous. It's like my daughter actually works at Nike now, and it's hard for her to unplug. Those people almost work, really driven people almost work 24/7. They have their phone there. They're constantly in touch with people. It's very hard to step away and find time, not only for yourself, but for your family and friends as well.
Thank you. What's your message to entrepreneurs worldwide who want a reset of their lives as well?
Well, I think I just said it. I have to analyze and make sure you like what you're doing. Hopefully you're good at it. I used to be probably an overly loyal employee and maybe stayed too long at some of my jobs. And again, that was kind of how I was, when I was a kid, you could come out of high school and go to work for a company and stay there for 30 years. That's not how the world works. When I went to Nike, I think Nike was my third job, and I was stunned how managers came and went there. People would come in, they would like kill it, burn themselves out for 2 years, make as much money as they could, I suppose. And then they would leave going someplace else. I found that to be stressful in the sense that, you never know how good, one of my Mark Doherty isms is you never know how good you are until you leave your current employer. Because I don't care how good you are, when you go to a new company, you start over. There's a whole new set of plans and directions there. You're dealing with all new people. Part of success in business is getting along with your workers and coworkers. If you don't, you're a driven person to where you treat people like shit, you're not going to be, in my opinion, successful. Now, there's guys like Steve Jobs. I read Steve's autobiography or biography, and I mean, he was a tough guy to work for. I couldn't Steve Jobs. He probably wouldn't want me to work for him, but I cannot. And it's part of my DNA. Lily is, I want to be treated fairly. I'm a semi-intelligent guy. That doesn't mean you can't get pissed at me, but don't sit there and yell at me and call me an idiot. First of all, I'm going to go toe to toe with you. And then if I don't I'm probably going to leave. Even with my anxiety, I always knew what I had inside of me. And I would only take, not that people gave me a lot of shit, because I had pretty good positions. But I got, and especially now, I don't take shit from anybody. If I got something to say, I'm going to say it. I'm a little bit off the cuff sometimes. I think there's some people that appreciate it. Most people don't. People, it's funny, when I was in therapy, my therapist said, thrive on conflict. And then we argued for 15 minutes on the word thrive. I don't thrive on it, but I don't back away from it either. It's like, if you want to go, let's go. I will crush you. That's the mentality that I eventually got to as I became an adult, and my anxiety subsided.
That was a fascinating episode. Now, you've heard, guys, if you want to reset your life, he's a genius. Just ask him.
Follow us for more interviews with world's most influential business titans, providing you with the insights to awaken to your full potential so you can get paid to be yourself, find true happiness, and manifest anything you desire.